And the last kind of phase or area in this basic process is the event reconstruction. So we have our objects now as the evidence. We have our potential causes and effects. And we now want to answer, events that occurred in the system. And the main motivation for this is actually, or one of the motivations now for this, is the actual Trojan defense. I'm not sure if people have heard this or not, but in the past couple years or so, there's been more and more cases where people are suspected of computer crimes or computer-related crimes are using the defense that I didn't do this. There was a Trojan virus backdoor in my computer that some hacker put there, and they put the evidence there, and it wasn't necessarily me. And there are several cases of this, actually. I did a paper with a law professor last year. It's on the CERIAS BibTech, if you want to look at it. There's many cases in there of this, but there's one of the most famous one was one in the UK, where there's a person who was suspected of doing a denial of service attack on the port of Houston. And they basically took down the port's computers down. They tracked it back to this guy. This guy's a self-admitted hacker, but he basically said it wasn't me. It was some of my rival hacker friends who basically set my computer up. And they used a backdoor program that securely wiped itself, which is why the police didn't find any evidence of it. So the scenario here is that this is a person. There's no evidence of any malware or Trojan programs on his computer, but the jury was convinced that this could have existed and wiped itself clean from the system, which is why it wasn't found. Now, it's a legit scenario. It's a completely legit scenario that it could actually have occurred and all evidence is overwritten. But the point is that merely finding the files isn't necessarily enough now to kind of get evidence. There's more demand for trying to find how it actually got there. There's another interesting case actually in the U.S. that there was an accountant who was basically brought up on charges of tax fraud, where he was forging his documents, his tax filings to pay less taxes. And his claim was that there was a virus that came in and modified his TurboTax or whatever program he was using that modified his tax documents to actually change the prices, and that's why he paid less, because the program told him to. The ironic thing is that he's an accountant, and he had many other files on his computer from his clients, but their files weren't changed in the process. It was only his file that was changed by this virus in the process. But he got off as well in terms of an acquittal of this process. So it's kind of they could be legit defenses, but it's kind of more of an ongoing problem now to actually start defining how data got there and how evidence got there versus just merely saying, well, this file exists in the computer, therefore this person's guilty. So the goal here is to determine basically how they got there. And this isn't what's supported in any tools right now. This is kind of the new areas of a lot of research to actually find out, trying to learn more about the system. And the basic approach is to analyze the evidence, or the approach that we're having with this is analyze the evidence, determine what role it could have played as a cause or effect, basically construct the events from the cause and effects, and basically sequence them into some kind of chains. So, graphical-wise here, and it's very high level, we have our objects we found, X, Y, Z, W, from our searching. We analyze them. We say that, well, X could have been a cause of some event that changed its state to X prime. Y could have been the cause of the event. We're not quite sure what C and B are, but we know they're involved somehow. And we develop these hypotheses about what could have occurred with these. So, Y could be executable. And we go through and we reverse engineer it to find out major events it could have caused. Or it could be a configuration file that was used. So we develop all these general role classifications or hypotheses for the system. Then we basically put them together. So we analyze them, we find out we may want to search for, we know that this object B here has certain characteristics, so we search the system to find it if we don't already have it. We try and put them together. If we can find evidence that they actually occurred together, it could be multiple scenarios, has some kind of confidence level with them, and try and sequence them. This is, again, like kind of euphoric, nice utopian process to this that is very difficult in practice. Again, researching here, actually some people here, Mark Rogers and Megan Carney, did some work before, and the Trojan made me do it. It's basically a statistical way of looking at, was this file downloaded or, from Internet Explorer, came here from this program, or came here from this program. More statistics way of looking at, is there support to define this? Another approach to doing this has been a finite state machine, which is kind of difficult for a large scale, but using a subset of a program to make a finite state machine for it. So we find it in this state, therefore what phases must have occurred in the past to get us to this state. Peter Stephenson was here last year, I think it was. He did an area on using Petri nets, more along the lines of hypothesis testing If we think this process occurred, do we have evidence to support whether or not it actually occurred? So good time. The actual conclusion here is that we have all these process models that describe, how you can do an investigation and are great for training and for general guidelines, but they're very useful for defining actual technology requirements. And this approach in this work is basically to define, 3 basic areas on, related to how events work. As a side note, we've actually moved away from this work or gone much lower in detail, in that the high-level approach that we have here of these high-level events make a lot of assumptions, and we can't really give certainty values based on high level. So we're actually going much lower, actually looking at instruction-level events and much lower-level details to actually force us to show and model where we're making assumptions about the high-level events versus actual computer operation. So that's it.
Question. You said there's a lot of the stuff with Trojans going on, like saying someone else, Trojan made me do it. But what about someone, like when you set up a home network, a wireless network, it's typically left open, by default. There's been a couple cases, I think, where someone has said that, I didn't know my network was open. Someone logged in, went and viewed the kiddie porn, and it looked like it came from my, my network, but it wasn't me. And is there any way are there any tools to look for that type of, like someone? You check like the logs or something to determine if someone had done that, or is that a little bit?
Yeah, it's actually. There's actually a similar case that kind of came out that a few weeks ago that has actually formed where I think in the D.C. area or somewhere that this person was just driving around trying to find wireless access points and doing all his activity from these access points and just moving on to somewhere else. So they actually they eventually I don't know how they actually tracked him down in the end, but they actually managed to figure out it was him somehow.
So it was just all manual,
Yeah, because most access points don't have any kind of logging, and there's actually even in the paper we did, we actually referenced there's actually an article like in one of online security articles, whatever, and it basically mentioned that hey, this is a good defense if you're doing it. Just kind of keep your access point open, and claim ignorance, and say it wasn't me even if it was you, kind of thinking.
Also, we were saying that you could do certain things to preserve a machine without taking it down, like unplugging it from the network. Has there been any history of rootkits being aware of that? Saying, all right, maybe they're trying to they're kind of trying to start an investigation, start wiping data now,
Well, there's 2 things. One is that it's not uncommon to have it wasn't before. Now, I haven't seen it in a while, but there's, the shutdown command could be Trojaned. That when you type a shutdown, it actually wipes out the entire system. And we actually had a case for that once when I was working that, that was the case. And it was unplugged, so it didn't impact it. So we didn't use it. But, if we had issued a shutdown command, it would have, wiped out part of the system in the process. There aren't necessarily any Trojans that I've heard of that, will look for you imaging the system and do that process. But that's a much harder process of trying to, determine if you're reading every sector on the disk sequentially after this amount of time, that there's a problem.
How paranoid the attackers.
Yeah.
You mentioned that a lot of the other crime scene investigations are based on existing science, like the bullet trajectory is based on physics and fingerprints on statistics or whatever. What are some of the sciences that we need to define or develop for digital forensics? What are some examples that have been filled in? We got to fill in the blanks afterwards. So where are you going with that? What are some things that have?
Well, a lot of what we're finding out is it's basically all areas. It's not necessarily new science. It's more of just working the theory into the process. It's, that we realize in this process there's a lot of stuff with programming languages and actual program structure. There's a lot of work actually in operating systems and networking. It's actually pretty much all areas of computer science have theory that applies to it. It just hasn't been applied yet to actually, apply that and then use that theory to actually better define requirements and the needs.
Are there some things that you need to do formally